Okay, so I'm Amy Galford. I'm going to run through the first few slides, and then Katie and Sarah will get into some more specifics about some of our newer types of loans. This was adapted from a presentation that we did in April as a continuing education credit for operators for Vermont rural water. So we that was a 2.5-hour presentation, included some stuff about clean water, and we cut that down a lot. If it's helpful, that class may be offered again in the fall if you have other staff. Some consultants do have operator licenses, or if you want to send it up to folks with operator licenses, they may do another session of that in the fall. We'll see. We did have a wait list for this one, which is partly because people need credits, but I think also there was a lot of interest in how to get our money. So some of the slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly. We didn't adapt every slide, cutting it down. A lot of you were pretty familiar with SRF and with the engineering process. So the first few slides I'm going to go through really fast just because I want to make sure we have enough time to go into the detailed ones that Katie and Sarah are going to cover. And so we have lots of time for questions because I think that's the most important thing. We are also going to send out these slides and a couple other handouts to everybody. So don't feel like you have to write everything down. We will send these out. This will be in the handout. It's just a non-discrimination notice in all of our written materials, and also a reminder that if you ever need something for your own firms, for water systems you're working with to be translated or adapted in some way, get in touch with us because we have resources for it. So why is it called a revolving loan fund? We have a combination of state and federal money and repayment from years past. I won't go through all the details on that, but what I do want to point out is the roles of a couple folks in the newer money. If you've heard of bipartisan infrastructure law, IIJA, that new federal money, that for our type of projects was a special extra supplement of money to us for this 22 through 26 period. So we're kind of more than halfway through that. That'll be some of the special programs that Katie and Sarah talk about. And one question that comes up sometimes is kind of when you're dealing with DEC for the most part versus the role of the bond bank and VITA. We actually don't have the money in-house at DEC. We really do the technical approvals, the engineering, that sort of stuff. The final financial underwriting of the borrower happens for the bond bank for municipal loans, and that includes fire districts. And it happens with VITA for private borrowers. So often mobile home parks, homeowner associations, that sort of thing. So a lot of the actual agreements, the legal loan agreements, are between the borrower and either the bond bank or VITA. And part of the reimbursement process, we're kind of doing the technical approval on that, but the actual money and checks moving around is via other folks. Many of you would have seen this if you've come to our IUP hearing in prior years, and that'll be coming up most likely in July. Every year we have to do an intended use plan, which is telling EPA as part of our grant application to draw down federal funds, how are we going to use our money? They're not going to line up a grant agreement to send money to Vermont unless we have a plan for how we're going to use that. So that is a number of pages about the intended use plan, and then also the priority list, which tends to be what people are focused on. And that's primarily construction phase, but also other projects that have put in a priority list application to us. So those priority list applications open in the winter. We draft that in the spring. We're nearly done with that for the IUPs. So we'll be releasing those soon. Then we have a public comment and public comment period, and also have a hearing sometime soon. The IUP gets adopted in the summer between response to public comments and our approval from EPA. We let you know in late summer, early fall, if you are above the funding line, because we have a lot of demand for construction, and then that sets you up for being able to apply for a construction loan from that fall through the next summer. So a construction project does have to go through this. It's kind of like a pre-loan application. You do the priority list application first, and you have to end up in the fundable range of our priority list. We have one exception with that with lead that'll come up later. There's no fee for applying for either the priority list or a loan application. And if for some reason your project doesn't proceed or you're initially below the funding line, you can apply in later years, and there's no harm on that. And also, if you need additional funds, if there's a cost overrun, you can apply the following year. I don't need to go through most of this with you, but just a couple things to remind. We tend to refer to things as step 1, 2, 3 for planning, design, and construction. That's kind of just our shorthand lingo for that, but you don't have to use all 3 steps to go through our process. Some systems will self-fund planning and design and then come in with us as step 3. Other projects might do planning and design with us and go somewhere else for step 3. The main thing is you just have to watch out for SRF eligibility requirements, particularly if you're going to use our construction money. There may be things you have to meet that you didn't have to if you were self-funding or planning on using another funding source before that. A couple examples of step 1 that I want to point out, asset management that Sarah will talk more about, preliminary engineering reports. Well drilling and source permitting is sometimes confusing because you are doing physical digging in the ground and building things, but that is actually considered a planning step because unless you get a valid, and unless you're successful and can get to the point of source permitting, you're not actually going to design and construct a connection that will actually serve the water system. Environmental review can kind of fall across multiple steps. You kind of want to start it early in your planning process. You're looking out for any hiccups, but a lot of times you can't finalize it until you're pretty close to final design. Facility plan is a clean water term, but in most cases for drinking water, step 2 is getting to the construction permit. And then step 3 is the process of all the bidding and contracting, the construction and the post-construction. Planning and design loans go for 5 years. There's more detail about that we can get into if you need to, but those are pretty straightforward. You have 5 years to either turn it into construction or start repayment on a planning and design loan. And for construction, we start repayment 1 year after the project is complete. So a little more on this. Our planning and design, and really all of our projects start with a draft ESA. We do require in most cases an EJCDC template. And you really want to get that approved before you get too far along the loan. Usually for the step 1 and 2, the ESA is most or all of the budget. Like I said, for this step, the priority list isn't necessarily required. It's really the construction loans that is required, but it does kind of help us with our budgeting that we can kind of see like, okay, we think we're going to get this many million in planning and design, and we want to save some of our money for that. These you can just apply year round. We're currently still on the 24 funding cycle. We'll move to 25 after this IEP is adopted this summer. And again, loan agreement for 5 years. And by then you either roll it into a construction loan or you start repayment over the next 5 years. And these have no interest and fees on them. So it's kind of to get projects started and make the cash flow easy during that period. For construction loans, these are competitive and you want to, you'll submit the priority list application in the winter, get ranked. Again, I kind of already went over this. And then we do have some readiness to proceed milestones through the year. So if you're not making progress, we may bypass you. For other projects, we haven't done as much of that in the last few years because we were catching up on a backlog of loan applications, but we're nearly caught up on that. So we will be watching if projects are really ready to proceed. Sometimes they're delayed because of other things like a VTrans project or something. And so if we find out that one can't go ahead, we can fund something else. And then you have till the end of that funding cycle to submit your loan application for. If there's any of you out there who are planning on submitting step 3 loan applications on the current cycle, it'd be great to get those in. We do have some cases where you can apply off of the normal priority list cycle. That tends to be, there's some substantial public risk. This is a whole other topic, but it doesn't mean fast, and we don't have a pot of money sitting aside for emergency things. I wish we did, but we don't. But there are some off-cycle additions that we can do when something happens or something becomes more urgent. When it comes to a step 3 construction loan, because there's a lot of federal rules that kick in about things you have to have in place prior to the loan, engineering services agreement, the environmental review, and that includes State Historic Preservation Office review. So you're going to be checking for potential impacts, and you may have some mitigation measures you need to take. All the permits and easements need to be lined up. We can fund paying for those, but that legal work and the permitting takes some time. There's various procurement requirements where you would work with Cindy, Wynn, Dawn, and Allison on those. And then you should have your loan agreement prior to awarding construction contracts, or else you're proceeding at risk is the phrase. So if folks have questions about that, we can talk about that. Nowadays, we're doing much better about getting loan agreements out in a timely way. And so there should be less problems with the timeline. Just in general about using SRF, it's a great funding source in a lot of ways, but it does come with a lot of federal red tape. So you have to meet a lot of federal funding requirements, Davis-Bacon wage requirements, the environmental review, American Iron and Steel, Build America, what is it? Build America, Buy America. I might have that backwards, BABA. All of the red tape adds time and expense to the project. The good thing is we can pay for the cost of doing that red tape, but for some very small projects, it's the SRF process can be maybe not worth it in some cases, just being honest about that. And it's just the kind of thing where again, we're a slow process. There is for the borrower a single audit report required if they get more than $1 million in federal funds. If a borrower ever gets behind on doing that, we can't give them permits, including construction permits from drinking water or reimbursements or new loan agreements. So sometimes that comes up. It's usually a pretty quick thing to resolve, but something they have to watch for. Sometimes there's confusion about who's eligible to borrow from drinking water SRF. It has to be a system that's regulated as an active public water system with a WSID. For community water systems, it can be either private or municipally owned. That creates some confusion. Some people think we can't loan to privates, and that's not the case. If it's a community water system, you can borrow from DWSRF. If it's a non-community water system, it has to be a not-for-profit. So the most common example is the school, and there's a few other small cases, maybe a town-owned building, that sort of thing. So that's the place where the nonprofit comes in, as if it's a non-community system. So it ends up being about half, 600 or 700 of the water systems in the state are eligible. A fire district is a municipality, and we have a few former water companies that may or may not have changed their name, but did convert to a municipality at one point. So that can get a little tricky. If it's just a neighborhood or a connection on a larger water system, that is not eligible for DWSRF funding. Sometimes we get questions from particular folks about wondering if they can borrow from us. Consecutive water systems can, but if it's just a part of a larger water system, they can't. There's a federal eligibility handbook and a state guidance document with lots about exactly what's eligible. Basically, it's things that address public health concerns or upgrading existing infrastructure. We can cover the private portions of service lines of any material, and we'll talk more about lead and galvanized later. We can't fund premise plumbing, so fixtures, solder, that kind of stuff inside buildings. And generally, drinking water reviews step 1 and 2 materials construction phase comes into WID, and our loan developer group only does a few minor approvals. O&M is not eligible. Routine compliance monitoring is not eligible. When you have doubt about anything, ask in advance, and things need to be clear with subcontracting. So just when in doubt, get approvals before you start work. There are rare cases where we can do system expansion or new water systems, but primarily our money is for taking care of the water systems we already have. If you have questions about that, again, just ask early in the process, but generally we can't fund system expansion. Priority list application has a lot of different factors in it. It's primarily for resolving deficiencies in compliance. The most serious of those get the most points. We give a little bit more points to smaller systems and low-income systems. Give a few more points for some readiness to proceed items like having your construction permit. We give a substantial amount of points for the asset management plans if you have a recent approval on those. So that's all in guidance document 2, and Sarah will talk more about the asset management plan part. And lead is currently accepted year-round for loan applications. Doesn't have to follow the priority list application. As far as loan terms, guidance document 10 covers most of that in terms of interest rates, repayment terms, all of that kind of thing. Repayment schedules are based on actual reimbursements. So if they come in under budget, you won't have to repay what you actually got reimbursed from us. And again, planning and design. This was a bit repetitive for the class we had it before. Same kind of idea. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the priority list coming up. We may have some forgiveness for planning and design the last few years. And currently, if you apply for it right now, it's 25% forgiveness, regardless of what borrower and what project for planning and design, up to $70,000 of forgiveness per project. Construction, we will show preliminary loan terms on the priority list based on the priority list application. We scrutinize things much more when we get to the actual loan application, the real legal agreement. We look at that data much more. The actual loan agreement terms, we really look into approved line items too. So the priority list is just kind of penciled in terms of the dollar amounts and the loan terms. DWSRF construction loans are usually 30 to 40 years. The useful life of the assets has to be greater, which for most things they are. There's some treatment equipment that's not. So it might be a 20-year loan because of that. Our interest and fees are 0 to 2% for municipal systems and 0 to 2.75 for private systems. Again, guidance document 10 has a bunch of flow charts in detail about how the loan forgiveness works. It's calculated looking at an estimate of the impact on user rates. So we look at the project, existing debt reserves, annual reserve contributions, and it's kind of what the impact per user on your project is going to be. And then anyway, I won't go through all the details of that. That's in guidance document 10, and these are some of the factors in there: local income and the number of connections. And we actually look at it in terms of equivalent residential units. And with that, I'll turn over to Katie to talk about lead.
Okay. Thanks,
And
Amy.
Katie, you can just tell me when to advance the slides so we don't have to hop back and forth.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi again, it's Katie Parrish, and I will be talking about what is eligible under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund regarding lead service line replacement projects. So just for a quick background, the bipartisan infrastructure law implemented in 2021 allocated federal funding that started in fiscal year 2022 and will end in 2026 fiscal year for lead service line replacements and associated activities that Amy mentioned earlier as well. And both service lines and connectors, such as gooseneck and pigtail connectors, are DW SRF eligible, and that does include the privately owned side of the service line, sorry. And as you can see in the diagram on the slide, that would be what is outlined in the orange border. And there are specific types of service lines that are eligible for lead service line replacement funding, which I will go over in a later slide. And what I'm mentioning here, that portion is outlined in the purple dash border on that diagram. It's important to note, like Amy mentioned earlier, that premise plumbing is not eligible for DWSRF funding, and that is shown in the diagram within the property building, and that's outlined in that blue dashed border. So some components like replacement of water mains and meters and corrosion control treatment like pH or like corrosion inhibitors are eligible under our general funding, but not the lead service line replacement funding that has been allocated. And one last thing to mention on this slide, when you are applying for a loan, one loan can use both general funding and lead service line replacement funding. So you don't need to separate loans out by funding source, which is nice. And that can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as many of you are aware, under the lead and copper rule revisions, every community water system and non-transient community water system, they were required to complete a service line inventory by October 16th, 2024. And if at least one lead service line, galvanized service line requiring replacement, or a service line of unknown material was encountered during the service line inventory, the drinking water program notified borrowers that a lead service line replacement plan will be required. So moving forward, in terms of what is eligible under the lead service line replacement funding from our program, in the planning and design phases would be things such as IDing unknown service lines via sequential sampling and test bits are eligible for lead service line replacement funding, as well as design engineering for replacement of eligible service lines and connectors. Also associated costs with permit and legal fees, environmental review are also eligible for lead service line replacement funding. And this slide doesn't show a complete list, but just a couple of examples of what can receive lead service line replacement funding from our program. Do the next slide, please. Just moving on quickly to construction loans. It's just important to note that DWSRF funding requirements differ slightly from the lead and copper rule compliance requirements. So just something to be aware of moving forward with these projects. For construction loans, projects receiving lead service line replacement funding must replace the entire lead service line, so not just a portion, unless a portion has already been replaced. So for example, like you can't just replace one side and leave partial lead service line in the ground. Also, the connectors I mentioned, like lead gooseneck and pigtail connectors, that I mentioned earlier are eligible for lead service line replacement funding. And then quickly, some other requirements for that special lead service line replacement funding is if a service line is galvanized and is or was downstream of a lead service line, or there is an unknown history upstream, it is eligible for lead service line funding. And for future reference, galvanized lines requiring replacement with an unknown history upstream will be funded under the general funding after that lead service line replacement funding ends at the end of fiscal year 2026. Next slide, please. In addition, temporary pitcher filters are eligible for lead service line replacement funding during or after the project, and that is per drinking water program guidance. Also, non-routine lead sampling that is part of the lead service line replacement project is eligible for that special funding. And then, like Amy mentioned, that bullet, something to note, unlike the other Step 3 loans, priority list applications for these lead service line replacement projects are accepted year-round. And then the second to last bullet again mentions that that special lead service line funding cycle started in fiscal year 2022 and ends in fiscal year 2026, where again, it'll go to general funding after that for future projects. The last bullet to mention, it's just important to note that if lead service line replacement funding and general funding are being used in a construction loan, the construction costs need to be tracked for review and approval from our design engineers. So it's just something to be aware of. Next slide, please. And this, I won't read this verbatim. This was covered in a previous slide with Amy. The current lead service line replacement loan terms are the same as our Step 1 and Step 2 and Step 3 loans, with the 5-year loan terms for the Step 1 and 2s and 30 to 40 for construction. And I won't go over the MHI and everything else. It matches. So yeah, that is currently what it is. And again, like we said, we'll share the slides as well so that you don't have to write this down. It's also in guidance documents and IUPs. And forgiveness may change slightly in future IUP cycles. So that's just something to be aware of moving forward. So, and I think that is the last of mine. Okay, I'll turn it over to Sarah now.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, hello. So I will dive into a brief overview of how the DWSRF is supporting PFAS-related projects through emerging contaminants EC funding. So the EC set aside under the bipartisan infrastructure law is dedicated to addressing PFAS contamination in public water systems. And projects funded through this track are included in the IUPs for each year from 2022 through 2026. Our highest priority for these funds is to support systems that have violations of the state maximum contaminant levels, MCLs, for PFAS. And after that, we consider systems with lower PFAS detections. Eligible projects can be in the planning, design, or construction phases, and they must focus on either removing PFAS from existing water sources or developing new uncontaminated sources of supply. Emerging contaminants projects are eligible for 100% loan principal forgiveness. And in some cases, for larger loan amounts, we may combine the EC and general funds within a single loan. And the general portion will be subject to the loan terms and subsidy levels defined in the current intended use plan for that year. Additionally, the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division has an EPA grant to support PFAS work, and they are proactively reaching out to water systems to offer assistance with planning and design. You can move on to the next, Amy. Thank you. Asset management plans. So municipalities can receive 100% loan forgiveness up to $50,000 to develop and implement an asset management plan. There's no annual interest rate or administrative fee on the loan, and the loan term is 5 years. But there are 2 key requirements for eligibility for loan forgiveness. The first is approval from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. So the AMP must be reviewed and approved by the division based on the guidelines laid out in Guidance Document 26. And the second requirement is an asset management training. So at least one member of the municipality's governing body and one water system operator must complete an asset management training course. And this course can be taken in person or online, and the participants must complete it within the last 5 years. And one thing to note is that private non-municipal borrowers are not eligible for this special 100% loan forgiveness. And in those cases, the AMP is treated like a standard planning loan, and the amount of forgiveness depends on the current IUP cycle. For example, this year, the planning loan forgiveness is 25%. And another benefit of completing an AMP is that once it's approved, the municipality can receive 75 priority points for future construction projects on the priority list. And as construction funding is competitive, as Amy talked about, securing these 75 priority points is a significant advantage. And then one other special case to note is that if an AMP ends up costing more than $50,000, which is pretty rare, it's still eligible for 100% forgiveness, but only up to that $50,000 cap. And any costs over the $50,000 will be treated as a normal planning loan with additional forgiveness based on our current IUP cycle. And so most AMPs come in or at like below $50,000. But we do see the occasional exception. We can move on, Amy. Thank you. So approvals, reimbursement, and repayment. So this process starts with approvals for things or services, and once those items are approved, they're included in the loan agreement. And from there, we require that all invoices match what was approved. And reimbursement can only happen after that alignment is verified. So for municipal borrowers working with the Vermont Bond Bank, which is a majority of our borrowers, this is a reimbursement-based system. They submit paid invoices for eligible pre-approved costs. However, for private non-municipal borrowers working through VITA, there's an option to request two-party checks for unpaid invoices. That just needs to be flagged early in the process because it's not how things typically go. So the DEC CERT form, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, organizes costs under the appropriate ESA categories. And we rely pretty heavily on this form when reviewing costs for eligibility and approval. And so it's essential that the funding bucket language and amounts align with future invoices, because if they do not, the reimbursement phase will be pretty messy. And the ESA level of effort table helps to justify the proposed budget, but also be sure this is consistent with future invoices to make repayments move smoothly. And I think Amy flagged this, but if you're using sub-consultants, make sure that's clearly outlined, and it just needs to be transparent to us who's doing what and at what cost. Legal admin costs like bond counsel deeds and easements, land appraisals or acquisitions, and public notices and permit fees can all be eligible, but they must be pre-approved, and so they should be included in your project cost summaries up front. And for construction invoices, reimbursement requires a detailed approval process. So the invoices must be itemized and directly tied to approved contract items, and vague invoices will hold up reimbursement. So yeah, to avoid delays, ensure full reimbursement, just make sure everything lines up nicely. Thanks, Amy. UEI codes, just wanted to throw this in there because a lot of fire districts can get hung up. So to receive any federal funding, borrowers must have a UEI code, unique entity ID, from sam.gov. It's a free thing, but just beware of fake websites that try to charge, and always just use sam.gov directly. This process can be a challenge, as I'm sure you've all probably experienced, especially for fire districts, HOAs, small water systems. So we strongly recommend starting early. They'll need a few key documents, including articles of incorporation or charter and proof of a physical address. It cannot be a PO box. So for the purposes of the DWSRF, borrowers do not need full sam.gov registration, just the UEI. And we ask you to please not submit a loan application without a UEI code, because we really cannot move anything forward on the loan application side without it, and it's essentially frozen. So definitely make sure to get started on this early. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. So yeah, we will be emailing all registrants a follow-up with some contact information, helpful links, some documents, including a comprehensive list of what needs to be submitted for each loan step and where to submit it, because that can get confusing. If you'd like to join the SRF email list, feel free to email Tom Brown. And as a reminder, the IUP hearing will take place summer 2025 in Montpelier, or via Teams, or you can call into that. And please let us know if you have any questions or suggestions for future SRF topics. Amy, maybe I can like steal the screen real quick so I can just show some of the documents that we'll send out. Because I'm pretty excited about them. So here we have the master document of what needs to be submitted for loan applications for each step. So this is step 1, and we have what you need, notes about it, where to submit it, because that gets messy. Let's see, step 2, not much changes, and then step 3 gets a little more complicated. We had a lot of people asking questions about this, and so I figured it'd be good to have everything in one place. And just some other tips, some links, a nice lead general split guidance document for everyone. Yeah, so we'll be sending this stuff along. Open to any questions at this point.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm wondering if other people have experienced this or it's just me. When a draft ESA is submitted, along with the level of effort and project cost summary, that's essentially a budget. So when that gets approved and as the project proceeds, you get into budget variances, right? You may think you're going to spend a certain amount on geotech, but maybe less on that and more on something else. So the process seems to beg more future kind of follow-up ESAs, submissions to rebalance these budget variances. Is it just me, or is that the way the process is supposed to work?
I can speak to that a little bit, and then the engineers can weigh in terms of their approvals. If that's kind of where it's the art of how much you lump and split different tasks when you get them approved up front. So that's where we said in our slides, kind of like you might have a level of effort table that's incredibly detailed because you're trying to budget, I'm going to have 5 hours of this person's time and 20 hours of this person's time and that kind of thing. Those kind of changes, we're not looking at that level of detail. And so it's kind of, to me, coming up with reasonable categories. So, it's a budget justification, but you don't want to get so specific and detailed with so many subcategories that things are going to be thrown off and you're going to hit funding caps and have to rearrange it.
I get that.
So
yeah, go ahead.
it's hard to have a perfect answer for that. I would say also, if it's within an existing loan, then it is just potentially amending an ESA if there's a big category change, and then it's kind of a different thing if the change is so big that you need more money for it, then it's both an ESA amendment and a loan amendment.
Yeah, no, I get that because on the PCS, really the engineering is just a number. So you're right about that. Um, usually it's two numbers. One is going to be standard engineering and the other is going to be non-standard engineering. But then you're listing the subs separately. Am I correct? And some may be standard and some may be non-standard. So you may end up with 10 or 12 numbers in your PCS. And I found that's what tends to change as you go along.
Yeah, one important thing with sub-consultants is being clear, like, are they gonna come in on your engineering firm's invoices listed there, or are they gonna go directly to the borrower and get invoiced directly to them? If they're gonna be invoiced directly to the water system and they're gonna pay directly, then we pull it out as a separate category. If it's going to be a sub on your engineering services agreement, then, we might have a line for sub-consultants. And again, it's gonna vary
Okay.
project to project, but yeah, it is something to think about ahead of time, that you're not boxing yourself into really small
Right.
subcategories of money. We may have an entire sub-consultant category that could hold multiple things. And Cindy and Wynn could talk more to the construction phase.
Thanks.
I think, Dave, to your point, you want to minimize the number of buckets or categories that you have, because that'll give you maximum flexibility. And on the construction end, we typically see 4 or 5 major tasks: bidding, construction and administration, RPR, and post-construction. And within that, you can include a lot of the other necessary elements for project completion. And it is the most flexible that way if you do minimize.
Thanks, Cindy. And it's nice to
Sure.
see you.
Likewise.
After all these years, about 25 years, I think.
It's a small world.
Yeah, sure is.
I see Chrissy's got her hand up. Chrissy, do you have a question?
Just following up on that, I've had a lot of conversations over the past few months with various WID staff about buckets. And it's my understanding that from finance, they would like to see the least amount of buckets possible, that the engineer needs to accomplish their work. So for us, that tends to be a lump sum bucket and a not to exceed bucket. And our subs are all just under our invoicing. So we try to minimize the buckets, and I think that's, from what I'm hearing, that's what finance would like to see, because it's less work for them then.
Yeah, I for one always kind of think of it as the buckets on the certification form are how the funding pots are set up, and the level of effort form is where we sort of really review the detail of what work's being done.
Okay, I see Cheryl has her hand up as well. Cheryl, do you have a question?
Yeah, hey, I'm just repeating what I dropped in the chat. You're right, Sarah. I have never in the last 2 years seen any AMP come in for anything over the 50,000 forgivable loan, but just in the last month or so, 2 new ESAs have come in above the 50,000. And what we've done is we've asked the systems to verify that they know that it's forgivable up to 50,000 and that they will be responsible for the amount above it. But based on this presentation, it sounds that some portion of that extra might be also eligible for forgiveness. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the way that we had an asset management plan for St. Albans recently, and it was maybe like $100,000, and the first 50,000 was forgivable, and then the second chunk was treated as like a second kind of separate planning loan where it was subject to the 25% forgiveness rate that the current IUP allows. And so it was like 100% forgiven up to $50,000, and then there was an extra little chunk of forgiveness, and then the rest was a loan, if that makes sense. But I think that having people like confirm in writing that they know there will be an additional amount that they will have to pay back, that sounds like a good process. Amy, I don't know if you have anything to add there, if that makes sense. Yeah, awesome.
All right, moving on. Looks like Craig's got his hand up.
Amy, I apologize ahead of time if it's not the proper venue, but I heard you allude to the IUP. Is there any update on when a draft might actually get issued?
I can tell you it's nearly done, so I think it will be out in the next week or two, I would say. It's nearly done. We had a few, it was waiting on EPA to get us a few final numbers, and then there's kind of a cascade of stuff that has to be done for the bits that pay for staff salaries and things that are a percentage of other things and that sort of thing. So I know on both the clean water and drinking water side, it's very close. So I would say release within the next couple weeks.
Thank you.
We'll see. Patrick would probably want me to say July to be safe, but I think it might come out sooner than that. We'll see.
I appreciate the optimism.
Chrissy, you got your hand up?
Yes. So with all the WID folks we have here, I have a question that I've had for a long time. Who is the best person to submit an authorized rep change form to?
So our colleague Rod is the one who processes them, but I'm not sure. Do we want those to go directly to him, Amy? Is that? I guess we
often
don't have to.
do. I often do say, if that's something that's missing, and for those who haven't looked at it, for every loan, we want to have on the borrower side an authorized representative and at least one alternate who can actually sign legal paperwork and process reimbursements and that kind of stuff. And we always want to have at least two people, just because things come up, turnover, people go on vacation, that sort of thing. So we have a separate form for that because, of course, bureaucratic, we've got to have a form for everything. If they come in on the loan application, we use those. If there's a change later, there's a separate form. I wish on the form it said what to do with them. She doesn't say what to do with the form. Usually in instructions to people, if we need one, I say to send it to Rod. I might also say to copy whichever of us is working on a loan application, because we also need to update that some places. Like we have to check everybody official's name against the SAM.gov exclusion list and the State Department list and that sort of thing. So there's kind of might be multiple people working on, or we just want the contact information too. Sarah, maybe you can put Rod's email in the
Yeah, I'm
in the
copying that
in the
now.
chat. So he tends to do most of our processing in our database. And unfortunately, we work on a lot of different systems, and it's not connected to our email, so it's handy for us to have the email too.
Yeah.
But if you, when in doubt, Chrissy, you can always send it to one of us if you know who's working on your loan of the three of us, or it would be Tom Brown for all the clean water loans. We can get it where it needs to go.
So yeah, I would say just send it to Rod, CC the project developer, if you know who that is, so that we're aware.
Great, thank you. Amy and I have had that conversation about having it on the form of what to do with it. Because I know I've asked probably several people that question. I had another question also. If a water system received funding for their initial lead service line inventory, and now they're going to be moving into dealing with their unknowns, can they apply again and receive an additional round of forgiveness? Or is it the forgiveness is once you've got it, you're done, and now you have to pay for everything?
Katie, you want to take that one? You've been through that with a specific example now.
I know if a borrower did get the 100% loan forgiveness up to $100,000, they don't get that quote unquote coupon again. And so then they would just be, I think, eligible for the 50% forgiveness, if I'm not mistaken, Amy.
Yeah, and I think I've gotten a couple questions about this and brought it up as a policy decision. I'll try to get back to that on the slides and reshare it. The loan forgiveness on the lead loans is a little quirky because we actually have to give out a lot of forgiveness. Where am I here? Yeah, so basically you don't, if you're amending it for more step 1 work or into step 2 work, so initially you did the service line inventory and now you're going back and identifying unknowns in a variety of ways or starting to get into planning, like it doesn't completely start over with the new 100,000. But let's say you had, you only used 70,000, you can still access that last 30,000 of 100% forgiveness if you were eligible for it. And then it goes into the 50 over that. So we had a lot of.
What if you're not amending your previous funding? What if you just start over with a whole new funding application?
If it's the same water system, we're going to count the service line inventory and related planning as amending the existing loan. If they didn't come in for step 1 previously, then it would start with the new 100,000.
Okay, thank you. That's what I need to hear.
Yeah, and if you have questions about specific ones, it might be easier to look at a specific case and talk through the exact numbers. So you can send those to Katie.
Okay, any other questions on the presentation? So
I know some of you have been doing planning related to lead service line or galvanized service line replacement. So we're very curious about your questions. I want to make sure we have things captured and policy decisions made and stuff in documentation. So some of the questions I've been getting the last few months, like about that 100,000 and some other things have been formed. So if any of you have questions about service line replacement, we really love to
Amy,
have
can we
those.
talk
And
about
there's a couple people on
we-
from the service line group. I saw Allison Strola Castro and I think Danielle was on earlier. She may still be
Can
on.
we talk about test digs for service lines? Little birdie told me that test digs are planning, and unless we're replacing a service line, we don't necessarily need a CADX. Has that been completely sugared off and gone through all the various items?
As far as I know, generally environmental review is a requirement for step 3 when you're installing new permanent assets. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Don't go too crazy on what constitutes a test pit, I guess.
Nope, understood.
Does that include no archaeology?
We're still trying to get a straight answer ourselves on that one, Chrissy.
Thanks, Cindy. Good luck.
I'm being too honest, but that's the
No,
reality.
Godspeed, and if you need any help beating up Scott, happy to help.
We appreciate our partners at ACCD. We have a lot of projects to manage, but we're trying to get clarity about this now that we're getting into that phase. I think hopefully with a lot of those, you're already working in right-of-ways and developed areas. So it does make it easier probably from an environmental perspective. From the historic preservation, it might get a little complicated. Again, it's one of those things, start as early as you can.
I just want to put in a plug to the consultants that as you're working with your clients and they're hoping to replace distribution mains, convince them to think about the service line work as well. It's easier to plan it up front than to get out there, start digging and find lead service lines or lead goosenecks or Swiss cheese galvanized and have to do it on the fly, because the biggest thing that holds you up once you have a change order is you have to get the questions answered about the environmental review.
Okay, so any other questions on the presentation or any questions beyond the presentation? Anybody, any questions for the division? Got a few minutes left here, but you know, anything anybody wants to ask, feel free to bring it up. Well, Amy, Katie, and Sarah, really appreciate that you guys prepared this presentation, and thank you everybody for attending and for everybody's participation and their questions. Really informative. Really glad that we recorded this. It's going to go online, and I'll distribute it to my entire email list. So yeah, just thanks again. If anybody has anything that they want to talk about in a future sharing session, feel free to send it to me over email or to the drinking water sharing session email. Feel free to send it anytime. As always, I'll send out another email that is looking for ideas, and any ideas before the sessions or during, participation is really appreciated. So I think that'll be it. And thanks again, everybody. Until next time in about 2 or 3 months.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Nice
Bye,
job,
everybody.